Good afternoon. I'm Thomas Shaw. Welcome to our ongoing series, the Catechism of the Orthodox Faith according to the Old Testament. We're turning now to the prophet Jeremiah, but we need to give the background of the prophet, and then tomorrow we'll get into his prophecies. So following Hezekiah, remember, he almost died in the siege due to contracting the plague, and the Lord spared his life, and he lived another 15 years. And after him came his son Manasseh, who reigned for 55 years, and then his son Ammon, who reigned for 2 years, and then his son Josiah, who reigns for 31 years. So we're talking about the 7th century BC, and between these kings and the rest, we take up the bulk of the century and move a little bit into the following century. Now, Manasseh reverted to the practices of and the pro-Assyrian policies. Remember that Hezekiah had tried to pull away from Assyria and as a result, Assyria turned on Hezekiah, and the land of Judah was laid waste, and only the city of Jerusalem managed to survive. So Manasseh pursues a pro-Assyrian policy, and of course that includes participating in the general polytheistic cultic activities coming out of Assyria, as well as the revival of those activities that have been suppressed under Hezekiah. And so in Jeremiah, when he talks about why the events that we're going to talk about that result ultimately in the Babylonian captivity take place, he says it's because of the wickedness of Manasseh. And this is brought up more than once in other places in the Old Testament, that the person to blame for everything bad that happens is Manasseh. And so Manasseh, though, he managed, to give a more balanced view of his reign, other than that of the writers of the Book of Kings. He managed to build back up the cities. He got agriculture going again, trade going, and good times were had. Now, it's interesting that the account of his reign is a little bit different in the Book of Chronicles. We haven't talked about the contrast between the 4 books of the kingdoms, or as we find them in most Bibles, 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, and the books of the Chronicles. Now, the scholars identify so many thematic similarities between Kings and Deuteronomy, which we'll talk about a little bit more in regards to the reign of Josiah, that these are referred to often as the Deuteronomistic, it's a big word to get your mouth around, history. Whereas Chronicles appears to have been, as it's called in the Septuagint, the paralipomena, meaning basically the footnotes, is a later account after the Chronicles refers back to the Book of Kings, and also names other sources that it uses. So it's a little bit later during after the return from Babylon that these are compiled, the Chronicles. And in Chronicles, it says that Manasseh was actually taken captive by the Assyrians and was held captive in Babylon, and he repented. So whereas Manasseh's super bad in some accounts, he's just as bad in others, but he repents. Of course, the worst thing he did was he killed his own son as a child sacrifice, or to put it in biblical, the way they say these things in the Bible, he caused his son to pass through the fire. When you read that kind of thing, you need to understand that what's happening is that his son is being sacrificed. So he continues human sacrifice and in general, the various kinds of practices that have been dominant in Judah for centuries, and had been interrupted only briefly by the reforms of Hezekiah. His son only reigns a couple of years. There's a revolution against him. He's assassinated, and then his grandson Josiah comes. Manasseh's grandson Josiah, and Josiah's great-grandfather's Hezekiah. These are all continuing the Davidic line. He becomes king, and he's another reformer following in the path of Hezekiah. Chronicles has him immediately undertaking a reform, whereas the Book of Kings has his reform following on the event of the discovery of the Torah during the restoration of the temple. It's a very interesting story. Now, the Torah, it's called Torah, and yet the Torah at this point is not yet the complete 5 books of Moses as we have them in our Bibles, but appears to be the kernel section of Deuteronomy. So we talked about the various strains before and how they were potentially related to the old priesthood, going back to Uzziah and before for the P strain. That strain having additions develop clear into the exile, and how the J strain is definitely coming from the north, reflecting Northern Kingdom concerns, and also a rejection of the cult of that it was established by Jezebel, reading between the lines, and how the E strain I've associated with that, with the kingdom, the time of Hezekiah. And we don't have time to get into all the details of why I hold these opinions. Other people hold different opinions. In my mind, I have to have some place to put these things, so that's where I put them. But definitely the D strain, the Deuteronomy strain, is associated with Josiah and the discovery of the Torah during the restoration of the temple. Now, what happens is that they find the scroll of the Torah. They come and read this scroll to the king. And according to Chronicles, he rends his clothes. He's in mourning. How they have not been following the law of Moses. And so he undertakes a massive reform. And I'll come back and read this section at the end in 4th Kings or 2nd Kings chapter 23. Also, like Hezekiah, he establishes a Passover, and this we see as the culmination of the process I've described, where practices that were associated with the northern kingdom come to be absorbed into the southern kingdom. And this process reaches its culmination with the celebration of Passover under Josiah. Now, just moving through the history beyond this, what happens is that during the time of Josiah, things for the Assyrian, Neo-Assyrian Empire start to fall apart. And so when the central control starts to relax and the various elements within it the rumblings start to take place agitation against the central government. One of those is in Babylon, of course, and the other is in Egypt. So first, Egypt comes north to go up against the last, the remaining strength of Assyria. And it comes up the coast road and through Philistia. And then, of course, as we mentioned, if you go up the coast, you hit the outcropping of the mountain range upon which Carmel is. So it goes out into the sea there. And thus you have to go inland into the Jezreel Valley through the pass of Megiddo, also known as Armageddon. And so Josiah, who remains loyal to Assyria, goes out to fight the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh Necho, and he meets his death in this valley, in this pass, in the Megiddo Pass, defending the Jezreel Valley from the incursion of the King Necho. So following him, and these names are all a problem to pronounce, Jehoahaz, it reigns for just a few months while the Pharaoh is up battling away with the Assyrians up in Haran. And on his return, he goes and captures Jehoahaz and takes him to Egypt. So there's an Egyptian captivity of the king, his mother, and his court, and so forth. So he only reigns 3 months. And then Jehoiakim reigns 11 years. And now Babylon has fought and taken over control with, and he is a vassal of Babylon. And then and he dies. And then Jehoiakim reigns 3 months, and at that time he evidently pushes back against Babylon, and they come to make war on Jerusalem. And so we have the first siege of Jerusalem and the first captivity. So he and his mother, the rest of the court, and not only that, the entire elite of the city of Jerusalem. It goes into great detail about the various craftsmen and nobles, and the whole elite of the city is removed. So this is the first captivity of Jerusalem. And then following him comes Zedekiah for 11 years. And in his 9th year, there's a second siege. And ultimately, this is followed by the second captivity and the utter destruction of the temple. So today I wanted to give an idea of what is it that Manasseh is being accused of. Why is he such a bad guy? And to do that, I'm going to read the account of the reform of Josiah in 4 Kings 23. So following the king Josiah pledging his making a covenant with the Lord according to the contents of the book that is the bulk of the book of Deuteronomy, the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest and the priests of the second order and those who had charge of the weights to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the articles made for Baal, and for the sacred wooden image. Now this is the so-called, in King James Bible it calls them groves. This is the wooden pole that probably was carved in the image of a woman, representing probably the combined, as we discussed, goddesses of Canaan, combined into a single image. and for all the host of heaven. So there were images to the ball, whatever ball that happens to be. There was an image to the goddess, and then there was images or other things for the host of heaven. Then he burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron and carried their ashes to Bethel. Okay, Bethel is another temple to the north. And he put an end to the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had appointed to burn incense in the high places, in the cities of Judah, and in the places all around Jerusalem. This included those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun, to the moon, to the constellations, and to all the hosts of heaven. Then he took the wooden image to of the goddess from the house of the Lord to the brook Kidron outside Jerusalem. He burned it at the brook Kidron and ground it to ashes. He threw its ashes on the graves of the sons of the people. So in the house of the Lord he tore down the ritual booths of the male temple prostitutes, the place where the women wove linen garments for the wooden image. So as in many forms of polytheistic worship, an image is dressed, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom. Now, Topheth, as we've discussed in this valley, known in the New Testament by Jesus, when Jesus talks, he's talking about this place he calls it Gehenna. This is a symbol of hell. And it's a symbol of hell because this is where the children were passed through the fire, where the child sacrifices were conducted. So no man might make his son or his daughter pass through the fire as an offering to Moloch. Then he removed the horses the kings of Judah dedicated to the sun at the entrance to the house of the Lord by the offering box of Nathan the king's eunuch in the court. He burned the chariot of the sun with fire. As for the altars made by the kings of Judah on the roof of the upper chamber of Ahaz, and the altars Manasseh made in the two courts of the house of the Lord, the king pulled them down and removed them by force. He cast their dust into the brook Kidron. Then the king defiled the house east of Jerusalem on the south of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon the king of Israel built for Ashtoreth, another name for the Phoenician goddesses, the abomination of the Sidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of the Moabites, and for Milcom, the abomination of the people of Ammon. So it turns out that there were various, for the various nations round about, there were various shrines set up within the temple for various foreigners, and these are all destroyed by Josiah. And he broke in pieces the sacred pillars, and he cut down the sacred wooden images and filled their places with human bones. As for the altar at Bethel, okay, so now he's off in the north, at the other temple at Bethel, the high altar which Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, had made, who led Israel to sin, that altar and that high place he tore down and crushed the stones. He ground them into dust and burned the wooden image. As Josiah turned, he saw the tombs on the mountains there in the city. So he went and took the bones out of the tombs and burned them on the altar. He defiled it according to the word of the Lord, which the man of God had spoken when Jeroboam stood at the altar during the festival. And he turned and raised his eyes to the tomb of the man of God who spoke those words. And he said, "What gravestone is this that I see?" So the men of the city told him, "It is the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and proclaimed these things you did against the altar of Bethel." Then he said, "Leave him alone. Let no one move his bones." So his bones were saved along with the bones of the prophet who came from Samaria. Now Josiah also took away all the shrines of the high places, the ones the kings of Israel made in the cities of Samaria, to provoke the Lord to anger. And he did to them as he had done in Bethel. He put to death all the priests of the high places on the altars and burned human bones on them and returned to Jerusalem. So burning bones on the altar defiles the altar, makes it unusable. And he's on a complete killing rampage as he goes through his vast reform. And this he follows with a massive Passover. Like Hezekiah, he invites the people from the north to come, and this is a unification ceremony. He's trying to heal the division between north and south by celebrating the Passover. Now I want to just to give you a little bit more flavor of what's going on. I want to read you the account of the destruction of the temple in chapter 25 of 4th Kings or 2nd Kings. In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, in the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, this king is known in history as Nabopolassar, but in the Bible we know him as Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, came before the king of Babylon in Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every house was burned by the captain of the guard. Then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive the people who remained in the city. This is the second captivity. And those who deserted to the king of Babylon and the rest of the multitude. Those who deserted the king refers to, as we'll see in Jeremiah, and Jeremiah keeps telling them to desert to the king, because if they would desert to go into a treaty with Babylon, these things would not happen. The temple would not be destroyed. But Zedekiah doesn't listen to him. The captain of the guard left some of the poor of the land as vine dressers and farmers. The Chaldeans broke into pieces the bronze pillars and the bases and the bronze sea in the house of the Lord. They carried their bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, the shovels, the trimmers, the spoons, and all the bronze utensils used by the priests to minister. The captain of the guard took away the fire pans, the golden bowls, and the silver. The amount of bronze in the 2 pillars, the 1 sea, and the carts, and all the articles made by Solomon for the house of the Lord was beyond measure. The height of 1 pillar was 18 cubits, so that's about nearly 30 feet, and the capital on it was of bronze. The height of the capital was 3 cubits, and the network of pomegranates all around the capital were all of bronze. The second pillar was the same with a network. It's interesting that the archaeological record of Jerusalem up till this time is very scant, because whatever there is of it is all under the Temple Mount, and that's off limits to any kind of archaeological digs. So there is very little or to nothing that remains from the first temple. We can see the account shows how complete the destruction was. Say everything was melted down and or transported to Babylon, ultimately destroyed there. So when we talk about Jeremiah, we'll pick up tomorrow. Jeremiah begins his prophecies during the time of Josiah and continues all the way to the time of Zedekiah. So we'll pick up more about Jeremiah beginning tomorrow. Thank you. I hope you're having a blessed Sabbath day and are looking forward to the Lord's Day tomorrow. Thank you very much.